So, hi, my name is Anais McAllister. I am a senior in high school, a big sister to three younger siblings, proud president of Pride Club, and avid theater kid. However, one thing that I've been really passionate about and studying for a while now is the American deaf community. I started studying American Sign Language, or ASL for short, in 6th grade, and have, for the past 6 years, been continuing to hone my abilities and tried to be involved in the community. I've spent so much time learning about this unique culture and language because I find it incredibly interesting. Deaf Americans have such a rich history built up over the course of several centuries, and to be honest, I find it quite saddening that it's not studied as frequently as it should be. For such a rich history and culture, especially an American history and culture, it's not really brought up in American schools very much. So today, if you don't mind, I'm going to walk you through some deaf history and culture as just a sort of crash course. Maybe in the process you'll find yourself as intrigued in this extraordinary culture as I am. French Sign Language, or La Langue des Signes Français, LSF for short, was created in 1760 for deaf people to use in France as a means of communication. Other sign languages had existed before then, but this is the sign language that directly led to American Sign Language. LSF was used to educate the deaf population of France, while the United States remained without one unified form of sign language or means of education for the deaf children. Certain wealthier families could afford to have private teachers come to teach their deaf children. However, these were very expensive. These students were often taught through a combination of basic signs, writing, and illustrated images. Nothing super comprehensive. This was the norm in the US until 1814. Enter Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet and Alice Cogswell. As the story goes, Gallaudet was on a trip to Hartford, Connecticut, visiting family when he looked out his window and noticed a young girl not playing with anyone else. Gallaudet went over and met Alice, the girl, and came to find that she was deaf. He did not know any sign language, so he wrote out words in the dirt. Alice quickly began to pick up on what he was doing and was able to understand. Gallaudet spoke with Alice's father about wanting to provide Alice and children like her with a proper education. But not having proper resources, he would need financial support. Alice's father provided Gallaudet with this, and thus Gallaudet was able to travel to Europe. The schools for the deaf students in Europe were focused on oralism at the time. This meant that no signing was allowed in the classrooms, and students were forced into learning how to lip read and vocalize, as opposed to just using visual means of communication. Gallaudet studied these schools for a while and decided that the results weren't satisfactory. He traveled from England to France, studying at the Institut Royal des Sourds-Muets in Paris. While there, two things happened that would change the course of deaf American history. First, Gallaudet was broke. He had used up all of his funds and still wasn't sure how to best educate deaf children. Second, he met Laurent Clerc, a highly educated and respected member of the staff of the Institut Royal. Gallaudet asked Clerc for help, and Clerc agreed. The two of them set out for America, Gallaudet teaching Clerc English and Clerc teaching Gallaudet LSF. Together, they established the American School for the Deaf in 1817. In 1864, President Abraham Lincoln signed a charter to establish a national college for the deaf students, a school that was named Gallaudet University in honor of all of Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet's efforts to bring education to the deaf population of America. Deaf schools began to pop up across the country, some being oralist and some being manualist. Manualists argued that deaf people would be able to focus more on their education without spending large amounts of time learning to lip read and vocalize, and that sign language was more beneficial to deaf people, as it allowed them to communicate effectively through visual input only, as opposed to trying to force audio input. Oralists, on the other hand, believe that deaf individuals should integrate as seamlessly as possible into mainstream hearing society, and that the way to do that was giving deaf individuals education as similar to hearing students as possible. This often meant that deaf children at oralist schools would spend vast amounts of time with speech therapists and lip-reading teachers, even if it took away from academic class time. The idea was that it may take longer for students to understand which concepts were being taught, but in the end, it would be worth it so that they could integrate into mainstream society. Alexander Graham Bell headed the oralist movement in the United States, spreading the notion that if one learned to sign, they would thus become incapable of learning to speak. Using his evidence, which had no basis in reality and were actually just blatant lies, along with his beliefs in nativism and eugenics, he was able to move deaf schools into the United States to employ oralism much, much more than manualism. For many students, this meant having their hands bound in class so they could not gesture or sign. Despite efforts to keep deaf children from signing, however, a sort of underground society of signers emerged. They furtively signed with their friends during recess or after school. As a result, American Sign Language began to truly develop into a fully realized language as a result of these school kids, and deaf people were able to found the capital D deaf culture that one sees in the United States today. One such cultural practice that still remains is name signs. As a way of identifying other deaf individuals, name signs came into usage, a practice still prevalent and incredibly important in deaf culture today. The idea is essentially that a deaf individual assigns someone, a friend, a peer, a teacher, anyone really, a sign to symbolize them. So, as you can see, name signs are incredibly important to deaf culture, and they, like many other aspects of deaf culture that I haven't particularly touched on, were things that originated in deaf schools. These schools were boarding schools, so oftentimes students from across the state would come to congregate at that one specific deaf school. As the children congregated, they came up with these aspects of deaf culture that has still resonated today, like name signs. Another remnant of those deaf boarding schools at the time were different vernaculars of sign language. So, stick with me on this one. A lot of people don't know that sign language actually has more than one language in it. I didn't know it either when I started learning sign language. I assumed, like a lot of people, that sign language was just a universal language. I could not have been more wrong. Just as spoken language has a variety of different languages, vernaculars, dialects, and accents, sign language has just as rich a background. Not only do most countries in the world have their own sign languages, but individual regions also do as well. This means that in the United States, a sign that makes sense to one person may not be understandable to another person. One example would be the sign early, which many signers in the United States sign like this. Early. However, other people sign it using a lexicalized version of sign language, meaning that you're spelling it out using finger spelling, but you're moving your hand in a circle. So, early. But the idea that I want you to get is that signs can be different in different parts of the United States. So how does this tie back to those deaf boarding schools? Well, like any other school in the United States at the time, deaf schools were segregated. Racial inequality was rampant in the United States at the time. There's no getting around that fact. And deaf schools were the same. This meant that white deaf students attended white deaf boarding schools, and black deaf students attended black deaf boarding schools. So just in the same way that these white students came together to sort of form their own cultural identity, Black students did too. It was almost like two different deaf cultures in the United States forming parallel to each other. What this has resulted in is two very distinct and different dialects of American Sign Language. On the one hand, you have American Sign Language, used by the white population in the United States and often taught as the formal version of sign language in a classroom. And then you have Black ASL, or BASL for short. BASL is also sometimes called BSV, Black Sign Variation, but for the purposes of keeping one consistent name for this documentary, I'm just going to refer to it as BASL. There's a lot of overlap between the two languages in the same way that you have overlap between standard white American English and African American Vernacular English. Those sometimes minor and sometimes major differences sort of compounded over time to form a distinct dialect of American Sign Language. And this form of American Sign Language is commonly used by Black signers in the United States, oftentimes in the South. One of the most distinct differences between BASL and ASL is the range of motion. There's no right or wrong. It's simply two different dialects, the same way that people in the United States have different accents and words for things. Here's a couple different examples of words that are signed a bit differently in ASL and BASL. One other difference is idioms. In African American Vernacular English, there are phrases that simply aren't used as frequently by the white population in the United States. This translates over to American Sign Language too, where Black signers may be influenced by the hearing population's idioms to employ it in their usage of their sign language. This includes phrases such as "I feel you" or "girl please," things that aren't typically said in American Sign Language and are much more frequently used by BASL users. That's not to say that people who use ASL can't use these phrases or the other way around. It's simply saying that these phrases are employed more in one vernacular of the language than another. Unfortunately, because of the intersection of minority identities in the Black deaf population, it means that the Black deaf population of the United States has oftentimes faced unjust discrimination. Up until 1965, the National Association for the Deaf, an association I'll touch on in just a couple minutes, did not accept Black people into the organization. Black signers were effectively excluded from any clubs or organizations that could have supported their cause. This eventually led to the formation of the National Deaf Black Advocates Organization that was formed in 1981 specifically to promote equal rights for the deaf Black population in the United States. But anyways, I digress. I wanted to bring up BASL and the struggle of Black deaf Americans in this country because it simply isn't brought up a lot. Oftentimes, it's simply because the material isn't there. The history of Black deaf Americans in this country hasn't been allowed to exist until very recently. Luckily, we're moving in the right direction. The existence of the NBDA and other organizations that are promoting equal rights for both Black and deaf Americans means that the subset of either community can be allowed to move forward and forge their own history. In the past, the United States simply wasn't a place where Black deaf Americans could make themselves heard. But we're hearing the struggles of people now. And hopefully that means that 100 years from now, there'll be a lot more Black deaf American history for me to talk about. Now that we've touched on Black deaf American history, I'm going to move back to talking about mainstream deaf history in the United States. Keep in mind that even though we time jumped ahead to a really positive place in deaf history, we're moving back to a point in time where there really wasn't a support system for deaf Americans yet. That is until the foundation of the National Association of the Deaf. The National Association of the Deaf, or the NAD, was founded in 1880 by deaf individuals in an attempt to deal with the discrimination that they faced at the time. The need for the NAD became apparent in 1906, when the United States government outright banned deaf people from working for them. The president of the NAD at the time, George Viditz, was not one to go down without a fight. Following 2 years of intense protesting and enraged letters, United States President Theodore Roosevelt repealed these discriminatory guidelines, and deaf people were once again permitted to work for their own government. Wieditz continued as the president of the association, being hailed by the deaf community as a hero and role model. It was in 1910 that he had the idea to capture American Sign Language and film to preserve the language and spread knowledge of it. The deaf community thrived with the production of film, as films were a visual medium that they could understand and partake in without needing to conform to hearing standards. Movies at this time were still silent, so several deaf actors were able to make a name for themselves through their physical acting. Their abilities to storytell in a visual medium translated very smoothly onto the screen. Other forms of arts also became popular amongst the deaf population, such as poetry. In sign language, poetry evolved to become an expressive means of storytelling, often with few and indecipherable signs and purposeful emotive movements. The 1960s brought about a boom in performing arts for the deaf actors and actresses of the time with the foundation of the National Theatre for the Deaf. Sign language was being recognized more and more by hearing people as a viable means of communication. However, deaf people were still considered separate from the general population. The performers couldn't just be actors, they were deaf actors. The poets couldn't just be poets, they were deaf poets. Deaf culture was brought to the forefront of mainstream American media in 1986 with the premiere of Children of a Lesser God, a film starring acclaimed deaf actress Marlee Matlin. The film followed a deaf protagonist named Sarah Norman, played by Matlin, a janitor at a school for the deaf, who falls in love with a new hearing teacher there. Sarah Norman introduced hearing audiences to deaf culture and presented, for the first time in mass media, a deaf woman as attractive and desirable. Unfortunately, though, the film wasn't able to be enjoyed by deaf audiences until 2 years later, as the original release of the film didn't have closed captions. Matlin was nominated and won an Academy Award for Best Actress for the film, which was her first appearance on screen. Though very clearly able to vocalize after years of speech therapy, Matlin elected to use sign language while giving her speech with the help of an interpreter, further exposing the hearing population to the concept of deafness not being an inhibitor from partaking in American mass culture. Modern deaf culture has expanded to be much more interconnected between different areas of the country and even the world at times. Development of email, text messaging, social media, and expanded media portrayal of deaf people have all contributed to the mainstreaming of one common deaf cultural identity. More advocates than ever before are speaking up for the community, such as recent America's Next Top Model winner and Dancing with the Stars winner Niall DeMarco, a very vocal advocate for both queer and deaf rights in the United States today. One of his acting roles was on the television show Switched at Birth, which featured a myriad of deaf characters and actors. Continued representation and raised awareness allows people to have a better perspective into deaf life and culture. However, deaf celebrities like DeMarco would not be able to speak out today if not for the work done by advocates for deaf rights that raised their voices years ago. One of the most influential movements in deaf American history came in the late 1980s in Washington, D.C. Deaf students at Gallaudet University, yes, the very same university we were talking about just a couple minutes ago, were frustrated that the president of the university had only ever been hearing. Students pointed towards historically black universities, which almost always had black leadership. Why couldn't they be afforded the same representation in their leadership? In the summer of 1987, the president of Gallaudet University stepped down, and the board of trustees had to appoint a new leader. There were 2 deaf candidates and 1 hearing candidate. Students were already vehemently requesting that their next president be deaf. But when it was announced on March 6, 1987, that Elizabeth Zeisen, the sole hearing candidate, was selected by the board, protests immediately broke out.
We picked Dr. Elizabeth Ann Zinser as the 7th president of Gallaudet.
No!
Was because she is a very talented educator who
Impromptu marches and demonstrations began across campus as students swarmed in anger, seeking the members of the board of trustees. Over 1,000 students gathered outside the hotel that the board of trustees were convening, despite threats from the DC police to arrest them. The chair of the board, Jane Spillman, addressed the crowd. Not only did she reinforce that the board was sticking to their decision to keep Zeisen as the president, but she's also on record as having said, quote, "Deaf people are not ready to function in a hearing world." Students were very rightfully enraged. In retaliation, students took over the campus. For 7 days, rallies and protests shut down classes at Gallaudet.
We just met with the board, and they have refused to meet our demands. So shall we leave?
The campus TV station was hacked by students to promote their cause, and the angry students even locked the vice president out of the entrance gates. They held banners and cried out for a deaf president now, a phrase which ended up being the name of the movement. The fervor and magnitude began to attract the press. Students gladly spoke with reporters, and their stories spread like wildfire. The world was now watching an entire student body banding together to stand up for what they believed in. This was huge for the students, and the attention from the press had a great impact on keeping the students energized and focused on their goal. Before long, members of the deaf community from outside Washington, D.C. joined in on the protesting. The general population had now heard deaf students plea for the end of oppression and discrimination against them, and 93% of hearing people that were hearing about the story for the first time agreed with the students. The movement closely mirrored the civil rights movement that had happened only a couple of decades earlier in the United States. In fact, when marching through the streets of Washington, D.C., student protesters used the very same "We Still Have a Dream" banner that was used by civil rights activists after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. After 6 days of nonstop protesting and rallying that had garnered international attention, Zeisner, the chosen president of Gallaudet University, was forced to step down.
Concluded, therefore, that the best way to restore order and return this university to its business of education was to pave the way for the Board of Trustees to consider the selection of a president who is hearing impaired. I tendered my resignation last night.
An emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees was called. The meeting went for 9 hours, and there were two results. First, all demands of the students were met. A deaf president would be selected to serve as the president for the next term and all future terms. Spillman, in embarrassment and shame, also stepped down in unconditional surrender.
Today, I submitted my resignation from the chairmanship of the Board of Trustees of Gallaudet University and from the board. I took this step willingly because I believe strongly that it is in the best interest of the university.
This revolutionary week-long event changed American attitudes towards the deaf community. Beforehand, the general public typically perceived deaf people as unable to do something smart or organized, which was often due to a lack of representation in the media or language. For example, many schools at the time were called schools for the deaf and dumb. Despite what could have harmed this movement, the clean management and efficient achievement of a goal was a huge step for the deaf population to earn acknowledgement from hearing people. Thanks to the Deaf President Now movement, deaf individuals had been introduced into mainstream news and media in a way like never before. More hearing people learned sign language and began to appreciate deaf culture, seeing deaf individuals not as lesser than because of an inability to hear, but just as people who operate a bit differently. Since then, deaf culture has been gaining more respect and acknowledgement from mainstream media and mainstream culture as a whole, as more and more hearing people become educated on these matters, and deaf voices are listened to and heard. Which brings us to... It's impossible to try and talk about every single aspect of deaf culture in one sitting, or even a semester of classes. Hearing people can study deaf culture for years and still feel like they don't know how to properly handle certain situations, or enter a space used by the deaf community with the correct respect. I know the fear of accidentally being rude or overly inserting yourself firsthand, but the best way to learn is to simply jump in. There really isn't a way around it. Same as any other culture, you can do all the reading you want, but at the end of the day, the only way to truly begin to understand a culture is to get involved, to listen and to learn from those who know it best. So, for part 2 of this little documentary, I've asked some very kind participants if they would answer some questions that I've either had before, or I've seen before, or I know that some hearing people are wondering the answer to. perspective of people who are actually living the deaf experience, I think, is the most enriching thing that I've been able to do to learn about the deaf community, and I hope that you also gained something out of it. Going back to the beginning of this film, talking about the history of deaf culture, it's really interesting to see how deaf people really have forged their own identity, and how deaf experiences today, though very varied amongst different people, can sort of come together to form a community. When I asked the participants of these interviews to say what they were most proud about in their community, the deaf community, they all said it was the small community feel, despite the fact that deaf people are literally everywhere in the country. Whether you were raised by hearing parents, which 90% of deaf children are, or you were growing up in a house full of culturally deaf people, either way, that core identifier as a deaf individual brings people together. I know, at least in my experience, and it is an experience shared by many people who interact with the deaf community, when you first meet a deaf person, they'll ask you all of the teachers of ASL that you've had before, and who else you know that's deaf. And that's because they really do know each other. It's a tight-knit community, and while, yes, it is an overgeneralization to say every single deaf person knows each other, it is important to note that there's a really strong community feel that stems from these hundreds of years of shared history. The shared plight of deaf individuals in the United States of America has forged the way for these people to be proud of who they are today. And I think that's what's most important to get out of this documentary if you gain absolutely nothing else. I'm hoping that you feel a little bit better equipped to maybe discuss or interact with the deaf individuals that you may encounter in your life. And you will encounter them. More than 6 million people in the United States, that's 2.2% of the American population, has a fairly severe degree of hearing loss. 0.22% of the population is profoundly deaf, meaning they have no hearing at all. But, as mentioned before, some deaf people may be able to hear some noise with their hearing aids. Either way, that deaf identifier sort of brings them together and is a unifying factor. So given those statistics, if and when you meet a deaf person, just try to talk to them. Whether that be through fluent sign language, which I applaud you on, or just by texting back and forth. Put in the effort. You don't want deaf people to feel more isolated after those hundreds of years of oppression and stigmatization. Though deafness is experienced differently for every individual who interacts with hearing loss, there's still that shared history and culture component. Learning about deaf history and culture opens up new doors that you may not have even considered before. So I urge you, not only as a person who has studied deaf history and culture for a long while now, but also just as a person who lives on the planet Earth where there are people who aren't able to hear. Please learn more if you're interested. Deaf people are more than willing to share who they are with you if you just give them the chance. Oftentimes, communication is the basic thing that's lacking there. And if you open yourself up to maybe communicating in a way that's different or a little bit trickier for you, you may find yourself learning new things that you never thought possible before. I hope that this documentary has provided some new information to you about the history and culture of deaf people and their language. And maybe in the future, with just a little bit more education and interest, we can unify the deaf and hearing populations just a little bit more and cross that bridge that's previously been really hard to cross.
Of going Hollywood, chasing some cinematic schemes, but I'll give you Panavision pictures if you give me Technicolor dreams. I never thought in terms of growing up, nothing is ever as it seems, but I'll give you Panavision pictures, 'cause you give me Technicolor dreams. Up there, walking on it, I'd like to show you how. need you way back then, as much as I need you now. Some people like to send the world away, some sunlight on some silver beams, and I'll give you Panavision pictures, 'cause you give me Technicolor dreams. Oh wow, look at us now, all of our dreams fulfilled. I would implore you still, from under your windowsill.
So, hi,